Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our next session. I think the bar's been set high from the two sessions that we've had already this morning. And this session is where we're going to delve specifically into the topic of recruitment fees, which I think we've already heard from today is absolutely critical to the wider context on responsible recruitment. My name is Hannah Newcomb. I'm co-CEO of Stronger Together, one of the partners for the Global Forum. And we work on all things responsible recruitment, fair work, and a particular focus on tackling labour exploitation in supply chains. We work in the UK, South Africa, US, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Italy. And we run collaborative programmes to catalyse and scale impact. I'm joined by some esteemed panellists this morning. We've got Matt Jarrett, Chief Executive Officer at Proforce, Carola Galeppini, Social Sustainability Manager at Unilever, and Keelong Foo, Director at TAT WIN Group. And I'm going to do more of an introduction to each of our speakers when they begin their contributions. And look, many of us will be familiar with the importance of the issue of tackling recruitment fees in global supply chains. But let me briefly set some context so we're all in the same place. We know recruitment costs money. It costs to interview workers, to process applications, to deliver pre-departure orientation training, and the list of those costs goes on. We know in some supply chains and recruitment corridors, the business model will be to pass on some or all of those costs to workers. They might be passed on directly as direct charges, as work finding fees, deductions once in employment, deposits. They could be charged by known parties in the labour supply chain or by hidden actors and individuals. To pay, we know workers may have to take out loans, and those loans may have highly punitive terms. Workers may be subjected to shame or abuse if they're not able to repay those loans on time and in full. We know from the 2022 global estimates of modern slavery that cases of adult forced labour exploitation, 1 in 5 are due to debt owed to a recruiter, employer, or other party. When I reflect on the last 8 years since I've been working on responsible recruitment, since the Association of Labour Providers and Stronger Together produced our first guide to eliminating worker-paid recruitment fees, there's undoubtedly been progress on this issue at a policy level. We've got the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment and its commitment to the employer pays principle. We had the tripartite definition from the ILO. We've got various industry commitments committing to no charging of recruitment fees in supply chain. And policy development is, of course, critical to making progress. But sometimes what we hear less of is the operational realities of what progress on recruitment fees has actually led to for workers and how that's been achieved, practically within businesses. And that's what this session is all about. We want to hear about those practicalities of mitigating and remediating recruitment fees, and specifically where collaboration has been beneficial in driving that progress, collaboration between peer companies, with civil society organisations and worker representatives, with government agencies, and with technology providers. So this is a great opportunity now to hand over to our speakers, and they're each going to present a short case study on a collaborative project which has focused on mitigating and or remediating recruitment fees. I'll then ask a few questions from me, and then we'll hand over to Bonnie to ask some questions from the wider audience in the room and online. So first, I'm really pleased to introduce Keelong Foo, Director of TAT WIN, an upstream supplier of natural rubber, latex, based in Thailand, and exporting raw material to global manufacturers of gloves, garments, shoes, balloons, and other consumer products. So Keelong, over to you, please, to share your progress.
Yep. Thank you, Hannah, for introducing me. Very pleased to be here. Just to introduce ourselves, I'm the director at TAT WIN. TAT WIN is a latex processor. So basically, we buy the fuel latex from rubber farmers, smallholders mainly. We process them, we export them across the world for manufacturers of healthcare PPE like rubber gloves, balloons, garments, shoes, adhesive, anything that you see within your everyday products. So for the past 7 years ago, one of the big brands, just like Unilever, they actually traced us from the consumer back to us 5 tiers up through complex layers of suppliers. They came down for a social audit. They found many cases of forced labor. At that point of time, we thought that forced labor is something very extreme, but because we're in the formal employment sector, after that we realized that one of the key indicators was recruitment fees, recruitment debt. So that's when we set about having policies in place, having due diligence checks in place, and finally we remediate these fees back to the workers. So many of the challenges that we faced was we found that these cases were continuing to happen, and we continuously need to put in place processes to detect this risk early on so that the remediation doesn't get too big when we find them much later. So the project and the case study that we have been working on is a multi-stakeholder collaboration. So now, as many of you know, there is the EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Law. One of the 3 components besides deforestation and domestic law regulations is social compliance. So that traceability by legislation is coming back to us. And we realize that consumer products are going to come back to us to ask us about the traceability part. And that's where we realize we have to work with technology platforms and certification bodies to make sure that all these are compliant socially. So one of the partners that we work with is actually Quizzer. They are a worker voice tool and a training tool that enables us to train our workers on their rights. So I really like the previous session where there was a lot of talk about, the employers knows, the labor recruiters knows, but do the migrants know about their rights? So we found that training was actually important, and migrant workers, they're here to work. They have a very short attention span. So the application was great to allow us to let the migrant workers watch short videos, assess their risks at the end of the videos, and finally for us to find out more and then mitigate those. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And we'll follow up definitely with some questions, because I think interesting there, the intersections between, that traceability law and environmental law, but how that's driven that traceability on human rights as well. So Carola, over to you next.
Thank you very much. So I'm part of by way of introduction, I'm part of the human rights team at Unilever, and I'm responsible for developing and implementing our forced labor action plan. So today I'd like to speak about a case study, and I would like to showcase how brand collaboration is key and is very important to drive workers' repayment. So we're speaking about a supplier based in Malaysia that employ migrant workers. As part of our regular due diligence and compliance process, we do conduct regular social audit. And as outcome of one of these audit, we identified that workers has paid the recruitment fees. So when these issues have been are identified, they are escalated to us. So within 24 hours, we become aware of it. And we started to work collaboratively with the supplier over the prevention and remediation. So over the prevention to avoid that this would happen again in the future. And of course, as per our position, workers should be reimbursed of the fees paid. So it is not the objective to go into the details of these case studies. I think what is very important to highlight that whilst we start to work and engage with the supplier on the remediation of the fees, simultaneously at the same time, we also engage with another brand we knew from publicly available information that there was another peer company, and I'm happy to mention their name, Pepsi, that used the same suppliers. So we reached out, we engaged with them to test, to see if they wanted to collaborate with us and really support together the supplier to put in place those preventive measures, a remediation measure to help the workers. So yeah, they were very keen. We started to engage together. We had a brilliant collaboration. Together we decided to hire another third party, a consultancy company, that went on site, conducted worker interviews, really gave us the confidence that the calculation made and workers were actually repaid the fair amount. And also at the same time, this third party engaged with the supplier and supported the supplier to strengthen their responsible recruitment system so that they had that support. So it was a brilliant collaboration. We are very happy with it. And I think what is very important to highlight here is that collaboration help us to increase our leverage with the suppliers, because obviously we were two big brands working together. Also ensure that the language was common, so it was not only Unilever going there and say, hey, you need to update your policy management system, you need to do remediation, but actually was an industry ask, was not only us, so that was very important. And also we share the cost. We share the cost of the third party. We want to focus on actually improve workers, ensure workers are repaid, and not to spend so much money in consultancy, so that help us to share cost. So yeah, this is just a practical example, and this is an opportunity to really encourage other brands to reach out proactively when there are such cases to other brands and try to collaborate.
Thank you, Carola. Yeah, there'll definitely be some follow-up questions, I think, on how that collaboration can work, but thank you for that. And now over to Matt. Matt is founder and CEO of Proforce, a recruitment agency specialising in seasonal and skilled work placements. As CEO, Matt has driven innovation and growth within the company, and Proforce has set a commitment to be a leader in the industry in compliance and ethical standards. So, Matt, if you can now share your case study.
Well, thank you for that intro. So today we're just going to have a little look at how working with authorities in Central Asia. So we recruit in Central Asia, and we've developed these relationships with the governments and authorities. And I just want to sort of showcase how that's worked, the collaboration, the issues, and what we found along our journey over the last 2 years. Just worth framing that, you know, this is new to us in 2 years. We were heavy into Ukraine. February 22, we had the invasion in Ukraine, so we had to react pretty quickly, and we risk assess these territories, and then looked at developing these relationships to support our own activity. It's worth noting that we don't use any agents in our supply chain. We do all our recruitment ourselves, but we partner with the local authorities and government. Just to sort of frame the context and the issues that we find in these territories, I think it's worth just taking a step back and looking what good is. I know we've touched on it today, this morning, that there is some good things happening, and I'd just like to put a spotlight on the UK. We are significantly moving forward in terms of our farming operations within the UK, so just wanted to sense check that just quickly. When we recruit in these territories, this is life-changing opportunities for individuals, and it's worth just noting that's 15 to 20x. That's 15 and 20 times what people can be earning in their own country. So that suddenly starts driving corruption and issues in the home country. So whilst we're comfortable with our supply chain, what happens in front of it? And I think it's worth just framing that. There's some great stories, and we can talk about it. This is not just about the candidates coming over to the UK to work. This is also about how it's impacting their families and their cultures and their communities within their own countries. So I just think it's worth just framing that. And we just talked about it. There's a lot of risk associated with the supply chain. So in terms of where we are, we've looked at how we collaborate with local authorities to mitigate the risk to migrants. And that enables us to really focus our attention and drive best practice and ultimately education to these governments. And we've had mixed success in different countries, in different territories around Central Asia. But where we have been able to influence certain countries, we've been able to stop legal fees in that country, and they've actually reduced their legislation to not charge for work finding fees or services associated with that. So I think that's really important just to discuss, probably in the questions, but how we've sort of mitigated the risk to workers through collaboration. And at the level we're dealing with, we've had, we've been at government level in these countries. We've worked with the Speaker of the House. He's come to the UK with Parliament. We've taken him to UK farms to see what life's like, to look at their people on the farm and to showcase what good looks like. But ultimately, coming back down to the risk, Hannah, it's important to understand that by collaboration and education, we can actually help support what's happening in those territories and drive best practice. So, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Matt. Well, I'm going to ask a few questions now of the speakers, but please do get those questions coming through in the different channels, which I know Bonnie's monitoring. And we do want this session to be focused on practical, so if you can keep those questions to kind of what are the practical insights you'd like to learn more from our speakers. But Matt, I'm going to come back to you first. Because that's, a great example of that collaboration with government, but there must be some challenges associated with working with those agencies, those government authorities in country. What were some of the ones that you faced, and how did you overcome those?
So absolutely some challenges, and it's continuous improvement, and it's learning, and it's working with them. Finding the right labour authorities to work with is absolutely key. And we have actually come away from territories where we just feel we can't influence that change, and we're not happy with what's going on in terms of the process. I won't name countries, I won't name names, but we've obviously come away from that. There's always a condition to make sure that the workers are okay. So if we are recruiting, it's important that returnees are coming back, but if we're not happy in those territories, there's fees associated and significant before recruitment issues that we steer away from that, and we focus our attention on where we can have great collaboration and mitigate risk.
And what kind of leverage, do you find you have that leverage because of the opportunity that you can provide to workers with those governments, so that do they see you as a credible voice in changing their perspectives where there are risks?
When we were talking at government level, it was number 3 on their agenda, the president's agenda, on getting this right to make sure that it continues and people can come to the UK. So really, really powerful opportunity to help work and drive that success story.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to ask the same question of you, Keelong. So in terms of that, you mentioned it's a multi-stakeholder initiative, the particular work directly with the technology provider. What were some of the challenges that you faced, those practical challenges, and how did you overcome those?
Specifically, because we're talking about remediation, we have a lot of challenge across the board. But specifically within the topic of remediation, because we have to remediate quickly and fully, many of the recruitment fees, almost all of our workers are from Myanmar, some of them are from Cambodia. Almost in all of the cases that we found of recruitment fees and debt, 100% of them are undocumented. So how do we set about remediating fees that are undocumented? And when we start to do work about that, we also start thinking about if there's this percentage of workers speaking up about it, what about those who did not speak up? And if we remediate those that speak up, wouldn't it be unfair to those who were afraid to speak up because they were afraid of repercussions or so and so? So there wasn't any good solution around it, but the great thing is we have a lot of partners, and we were very open about our problems. We were not afraid to speak up that we have these issues within our labor force. So we spoke to one of the UN agencies, IOM, International Organization for Migration. We told them about our problem, and they say, why not you look at this? We do document the general fees that are involved in a specific channel, for example, from Myanmar to Thailand. So we were able to know the approximate cost for each of these fees. For example, their passport fees, for example, the visa fees, their travel fees within their own country to go to Yangon. Many of them are not from the capital, Yangon. And we were able to remediate them by part, whichever that they are subjected to. Some of the challenges that we faced specifically to certain fees were with passports. Because if you read many of the policies, the employer is not, even though they're supposed to pay for the passport fee, only if they do not have a passport. So if they already have an existing passport, we don't have to pay for that. The problem is we don't know who already has a passport, because if the workers, they know that they are entitled to, so even those that don't have a passport, they will have to pay. The issue, the altruistic thing to do is to pay everyone. But if you think of it as a business, we want to pay fairly, because the resources are just that much, and we want to pay exactly to whatever that was shortchanged to the workers. So that was one of the problems. The other problem we have with it was a specific country, so the G2G collaboration is very important. There was a specific country that we get our workers from, where some of the passports can only be renewed or applied through certain agencies, and there were bigger fees than what was is official. So this is some of the issues that we have. Do we pay the official fee, which is $50 or something, or do we pay the agent fee that was $300 or $200? And if you multiply it by a few hundred workers, that can get quite a lot in that sense. And finally, the key challenge throughout all these is competitiveness. Do consumers care? Do the procurement department, the sustainability department that we work with, they do care. But once you get to the business, the procurement department, do they put that within their procurement metrics? The current answer is not really. They don't really, when you compete within the same employers, there's a certain benchmark. Okay, you're CEDEX audited, you are of a certain level, but if you look into all these, we are paying all these fees, we're still competing with competitors, they are not. So in the end, the biggest challenge is level playing field for us.
And as a follow-up on that, that practical mapping you did of the, sort of predictable fees at each stage in the recruitment process, to what extent does that mapping help you in those commercial conversations with your customers to have the leverage to say, well, this is the cost of responsible recruitment, and is that a practical way that enables you to have those tricky commercial conversations when cost pressures are there?
Yeah, it's just like, the truth is the sustainability department is all in. The procurement department, the business is not. But the great thing about it is we don't see that challenge, we see an opportunity, because there are legislation coming up, like the EU CSDDD, there's the CSRD, there's the EUDR for us in the rubber industry. And more importantly, there's a big macro trend of consumers being more aware about these issues. So like we hear about people buying clothes from a certain online retailer, they will say, oh, they're subjected to forced labor or child labor. So this is great. So we are riding on this tailwind, and we're telling our customers that this is what needs to be done, and hopefully we'll influence more vertically down the chain or horizontally across the industry.
And I've got one more question to follow up with Keelong, and then I'm going to come to Carola. So the examples like you're sharing, how can those be scaled? Is it information sharing, legislation which you've talked about, positive recognition? How do we scale these kinds of examples?
Exactly. So it's a great question. And this is the next challenge for us. I would say that we have already completed having the due diligence system, having the grievance mechanism within our labor force. However, we buy from tens of thousands of smallholder farmers. And many of them could be we are in southern Thailand, so we are at a transit point between Myanmar and Malaysia, where some of the refugees may be going through. So we're looking at a risk that some of the smallholders may be engaging, recruiting migrant workers informally. So we are riding on the wave of the traceability, being able to trace exactly which smallholders we buy from and where, and whether they are engaging with the migrant workers, and finally using tools like technology tools to conduct these assessments on them. We can't do it ourselves with tens of thousands of workers, but we can do it digitally, and then we can scope in on those focus areas that we see that are red flags or problematics that we can go in and solve. So collaborative approach.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Keelong. And I'm sure there will be some questions for you from our audience. Carola, I'm going to come to you now. And firstly, I'm going to apologise because I didn't do your full introduction. So apologies on that. And you have had, in recent years, particular exposure and supporting directly on detection, prevention and remediation of forced labour issues across Unilever's supply chain. And we heard in the earlier sessions the importance of ensuring worker input, worker feedback on the process. So I'm going to ask you now, how do you measure the impact that you're having on workers through these interventions?
It's a good question, and there is no, I think, an easy answer for this. Well, okay, if we were speaking only about the payment of fees and follow our standard process, so when we identify issues of fees repayment, we require our supplier to develop a corrective action plan. We work with them, we agree on this corrective action plan, so we agree also on the amount the workers should be repaid. So in that way, we know how much workers will be reimbursed, and then we have a follow-up audit to ensure that that reimbursement took place. Also, recently, we tried to go beyond the standard process, and we commissioned a third party to conduct an impact study and to really understand and assess the impact of fees repayment, what impact fees repayment had on workers as well as the supplier. It's still going, we're still working on it, but the methodology taken was to go on the ground, interview workers, but also go beyond that and interview the workers' families to understand how those fees really impacted the not only workers but their families. As we know, the remittance, it's very important. So yeah, so we did recently this assessment. But I think also when we speak about workers' impact, we cannot only focus on the fees repayment. So as Arti from Embod earlier mentioned very clearly, we cannot look at remediation as only fees repayment, but it's very important to look as well at all other indicators correlated with forced labor. Because we might reimburse a worker, pay them some money, but then they might not be able to go back home, as Arti mentioned, or they might have their passport retained, they might not be able to change employer. So I think we need to look holistically what action impact the worker freedom of movement and well-being. And also very important to, when we speak about impact, to look also beyond the compliance. So we are really looking at how we go beyond the audit and how we look at different workers' voice tool and what are the options we have available to reach out directly to workers. So I think there is no one only solution to measure the impact on workers. There could be a combination through like workers' voice, risk assessment, independent studies to measure that.
Great, and I'm going to do a follow-up question with you, Carola, which you mentioned you worked on that particular remediation case with Pepsi. You've also mentioned about the importance of working with third parties. So what are those benefits of working collaboratively with other stakeholders? And what more support and input do you need from your suppliers, from governments, from NGOs, worker representatives? What does that good collaboration look like?
Yeah, I mean, the earlier example, I think, is a really good example of good collaboration, because I think suppliers need practical support. Reimbursement of fees is a very complex subject, and we need to really join forces to support them the best we can. So I think, for example, if we take our collaboration with Pepsi, we did not face any legal barrier. Of course, we did not discuss any commercial details, and our conversation was really only limited to workers' welfare. So there were no legal burdens or legal issues about that. So I think what brands could do more is really, when they face this case, reach out, just ask procurement who are the other clients. Normally procurement knows, and just reach out, because that will be done in the spirit of workers, to respect the workers' rights. So yes, and then I think very important the work we're doing at the moment on capacity building and prevention, and I think we are really, as an industry, when it comes to supplier training, improving and moving along, and really moving away from tick-the-box exercise, coming in, do a training, walk away, but really trying to going back to the impact, how we can actually ensure that suppliers, they do change their policy management system that translate in impact for workers. Now we can measure that impact. And I think maybe we didn't nail it yet, we didn't reach there as an industry, but that's the direction we are taking, and we need to keep on going with that.
Great, thank you. And Matt, I'm going to ask you the same question. In your case, there was a particular focus on that collaboration with the in-country authorities, but yeah, what were those benefits of collaborating? Who else was involved, and what support and input do you need more of?
Need more? Right, okay, so the GLAA in the UK is the authority that looks after the agency's employment, and everyone has to be licensed in the UK. They have been out to the territory, and they've signed agreements. What I would say is, unfortunately, they're so underfunded. There's no sort of follow-up, and there's no support for the operators or the recruiters to the right level, in my opinion. They've been out, they've seen it. When I've looked into the agreements, it's been quite vanilla. It's been about sharing information, which is fantastic. But in terms of the recruitment and coming through the supply chain, it would be great to have more funding available from the UK to be able to support the recruiters coming into the UK. So I think that's important. I would just like to sort of say the UK embassy in the home countries have been phenomenal and a great help to us to really develop the relationships. Like I said, we brought a delegation back from Central Asia to the UK, and the Foreign Office were fantastic. We were talking about some significant trade deals and so forth. So a really interesting sort of dynamic at that level, which helps drive the right behaviour in those countries and the support that we desperately need. I think so. Yeah. So that's really where we are.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I think interesting there to hear the perspective of the need for greater enforcement. We know with the UN Guiding Principles, businesses and governments both have a responsibility. So it's great to hear some examples of how that comes together and the joint responsibility between governments and businesses, but interesting to hear where there are challenges in seeing governments taking theirs. And
as a private business, we can only do so much. Yeah. It's about everyone coming together, going in the same direction and wanting the same outcomes. And I think, we can do a lot of good stuff, but we are only one entity, and there's some great operators in the UK working to the right goals. But ultimately, we need bigger collaboration across multi-sectors. NGOs, we've always welcomed them. We want to be transparent and honest through our recruitment, and we will take criticism and advice and take that on board for that continuous improvement journey. It will be great if they come on the journey with us a bit more than being a little bit separated and wagging the finger at certain times. And I think there is a lot of collaboration starting to happen, but over the last sort of 2 years, I think they've been quite, sort of standoff from engaging. We've been very open. We've taken Flex from the UK. We've taken University of Nottingham looking at various things on our last recruitment campaign, and we want to be transparent, we want to be honest, we want to continuously improve and reduce the exposure to the workers.
That's great. Well, I'm going to see whether we're ready for some questions from the audience. If you need a couple more minutes, Bonnie, I've got some burning questions that I could ask, but if you're ready, then...
We have so many questions.
Amazing.
Very nuanced, very detailed questions.
We're going to try to get through as many as possible. So if you're ready, let me start. So we have one audience member who would like to hear Keelong to find out more about how difficult was it to get factory management buy-in when you found out that after discovering forced labor. Can you talk to the audience about the practicalities of getting these buy-in? We have, I think maybe for Carola, if you don't mind, we have a question I think you'll be very well placed to address. When recruitment fees are identified, what can multinational corporations do to support suppliers that are perhaps not able, financial or otherwise, to embark on remediation? So I'm hoping maybe if you have an example from Bangladesh, you can combine it with that, because we have somebody listening in from Bangladesh who wants to know what they can do to address recruitment fees in Bangladesh. So that would, help the list. And then Matthew, I think perhaps you can speak to this. We have a general question from an audience member who wants to know, how do we create this level playing field? You talk a lot more on working with governments and authorities. Glad to hear what the UK government has done. What can we do more? What, this vision of a level playing field that businesses ask for, what more can be done? So this is just the first round, there are more coming.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, so Keelong, we'll come to you first. The practicalities of how you get that factory management buy-in.
Great question. Just to introduce about TAT WIN, we're just, I would say we're a pretty large majority of private business in Asia. We're family owned. We are the second generation. I run the business with my brother, Jarrett here. We own and we manage the company. So in that sense, you would think that we have ultimate control. We have authoritarian power over the entire management. That's not true. If you realize, after customers come to us and we realize that we have been subjecting our labor force to forced labor issues, we set about making the change. We couldn't make the change by ourselves. We have to get buy-in from the middle management, from our employees. What is worse than our employees resisting us are those employees who tell us that, yeah, we'll do it, and then they don't. So that's the most dangerous kind of employees that you have when you want to set about these changes. So that's really a lot of convincing that you have to speak to. Our company has already existed for more than 20 years. Many of the employees have worked with my family for 20, 30 years. And it's really difficult to set about changes in human resources, in procurement, when they speak to the farmers. They have to be completely bought into our strategic vision. We know that it's a macro trend. This is how we're going to exist for the next 10, 20 years. Everybody has to be on board. And unfortunately, as you said about all these changes, over years, some will leave because they don't agree with your vision. Or what's better is people will join you because they agree with your vision. So when you set about all these changes, you have to be mindful that your team will change. And maybe it's for the better or for the worse. And like what Matt said, we're in Asia, there's quite a lot of corruption cases, and especially with labor recruitment, because there's a lot of fees involved. So having that change is actually great for us because we realize there are corruption issues within our company in the labor recruitment channel and with certain recruiters as well. So we all this transparency, it's actually challenging in the short term, but rewarding in the long term. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Carola, on to that next question. How can multinational corporations practically support their suppliers where the cost burden of remediating might be challenging? What are those financial mechanisms?
This is another challenging question. So when we found out about workers paying fees, as I said before, we reach out to the supplier. Normally the four things we say is, well, let's understand what is the problem, what we're speaking about. So how many workers, when those workers were recruited, what is the nationalities, how much fees they would have paid roughly to get an idea of what we are speaking about. That's need to be the first step so that we understand what is the problem. And that's already in that process, we understand which supplier are willing to collaborate, engage with us, and the other supplier that actually push back and show a less collaborative approach. And then, and that's also give us an indication what are the suppliers that have been in business, for example, for many years, and what are the suppliers that might have been hired quite recently that could be currently in a situation of debt. So if there are workers that are in a situation of debt, so in a situation of current forced labor, then there is really no negotiation, and the suppliers need to repay the workers. And in case, coming back to the question, if the supplier really are a financial problem, that's also why it's very important to engage with other brands, with other companies, to find a common solution to the problems. It's really important to see which are the other customers, how we can get together, and which support we can get to the supplier. And I totally agree, this is a big challenge, because as also was an earlier case, was an example, we don't want to impact negatively worker. We want to ensure that the workers keep their jobs and actually not negative impacting them and supporting them. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there is one solution, and I don't have one answer. But I think see where as the problem come in and discuss with other customers, with the industry, and to see what solution could be found.
Great, thank you, Carola. And then Matt, on that last question,
Level playing
what
field.
do you need for that level playing field? What do you need to see and from who?
So in the UK, we've got the task force, so that's a great initiative to drive best practice around the seasonal worker scheme that we're supplying. So that is across NGOs, brands, recruiters, and stakeholders generally that are coming together to understand best practice and drive that future succession of the scheme, and that's really great, and there's great collaboration happening. It worries me when we start talking about the brands and responsibilities and them understanding the total supply chain. So, you know, we've got to be transparent and honest about what's happening in these territories. And going back to what we discussed originally, you know, there's so much demand that it drives this behaviour of people wanting to pay to get into the room, to get the fees. And coming back to the point raised this morning, if people don't pay something, they don't think they're going to get something, and it's not real. So coming back to working with authorities and the governments, it's about educating in those territories to improve that communication. We've worked and done some great initiatives on the Just work app, which gives information to workers real time in their own language to be able to sort of showcase away from a recruiter and an operator. So there's information out there that they can take on board, and we're working with those territories to improve the communications through their official channels, and that comes with education, and that doesn't happen overnight. So as much as we're comfortable in some elements of the recruitment process, we do the recruitment ourselves, people are not charged for the recruitment fees. The challenge we have and still have is before they come into the room, and that is where there's a lot of fees being burdened on the workers. So that's really a spotlight on how we can focus on that. And that's not just us as a company, that's the industry, that's how we move forward together.
And that's where the collaboration to send that consistent message to those origin country governments on the importance of tackling the pre-recruitment risk.
Okay. Yeah, and just going back to, we've only been in those territories for a couple of years. Now we've got returnee rates coming up, and that's fantastic. So you've got 60, 70%, depending on the farm, coming back, and then they start talking to their peers, and there's confidence in us as recruiters, confidence in the UK and the farms. Don't get me wrong, there's lots of work to be done, but I think we're going in the right direction.
Great, thank you. I would like to come to you on that same question, Keelong, if that's okay, around the levelling the playing field, because you mentioned earlier about those challenges in it is a competitive industry, you're wanting to meet those standards but competing against others that maybe aren't. So what would you say are some of the things that you want to see on that from a competition perspective to level that playing field on responsible recruitment grounds?
I would say something similar to what Matt has mentioned, transparency, being open and transparent in engagement. And ultimately, being transparent, you will be, and speaking up about what you do. And I think it will bring about more attention, more knowledge about what is possible and what has been done. And by having that present, not just to your direct customers, to several tiers down, it will actually expose to brands like Carola's company, where they are aware that this is possible, and there are players that are doing that, and they can encourage more players to do that. And I think ultimately, having that knowledge and awareness will level the playing field eventually. So I would say it will not be immediate, but it will take time. And it's important for all of us to be transparent. And that's why, again, the collaborative approach is very important, as opposed to the zero tolerance approach. Mm-hmm. By having a zero tolerance approach, you're just negating everything that people with the good intention or work plans to work towards it. So again, collaborative approach and being transparent.
And that's why I'm going to bring Carola in then, because as a brand and taking a collaborative approach, do you find that that collaboration with peers and sending a consistent message is enough to level the playing field, and through a kind of a voluntary approach, or do you feel you need the structures of legislation as well to kind of back up what businesses that are being proactive are doing to kind of apply to others?
I mean, it's a combination, of course, so both are key and extremely important. The common message across brands, it's super important, and that's, for example, was very important the work we did in collaboration with CGF and in progress on the remediation guidance, because showcase that as an industry, as a brand, we're all aligned what we require from suppliers. But from the regulatory legislative, it's also extremely important to have that the regulatory system in place. And also, of course, the work on advocacy to drive that. It's essential, the work that CGF is doing, especially in Southeast Asia. That's extremely, that's key. And lots of effort should be put into that, I think, also. That should go in parallel.
Yeah, we're going to come back now, Bonnie, to some more questions, please.
Well, we're not going to be able to get through all the questions that were asked during this panel. So, first of all, Keelong, thank you for speaking to us so transparently. You wouldn't be surprised that we got more follow-up questions for you. So but as you said, this is important, right? So,
yeah, sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So the question focused on have you made any changes to your recruitment process since, the case study you spoke about, and what are your subsequent learnings? And I'm going to end with perhaps a big one. We know about the challenges facing SMEs, right? The Working Group on Business and Human Rights came out and spoke about SMEs operating with, lower cash reserves and tighter margins. So this question's on the regarding of the remediation of recruitment fees. The impact guidelines allow for prioritization if it poses significant financial risk, as in the case of SMEs. So from your experience, if this prioritization is to be done, what is the most significant risk factor? Is it by the amount of debt, or is it by level of skill? So can I leave it with one big one and one quick one for Keelong to answer, and Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, that second one's certainly a big one. Thank you. But yeah, on the practicalities, the changes to your recruitment process as a result of the case, were there any?
Yeah, so that's a big question. I will take a long time to answer. What we have done to make changes. Initially, we did direct recruitment. We wanted to bypass the recruiters. However, eventually with COVID onset and all that, we realized it's not possible. We still have to revert back. But I would emphasize on the 4 major factors major changes that we've done, which is our policies. We have changed all our policies to be in line, and we have communicated these policies to the labor recruiters, to our suppliers. We have due diligence in place, including the use of technology, as well as our own people who are trained in conducting these due diligence. Thirdly, with this remediation, which we are talking about. Remediation would initially be difficult because it will be a one-off major cost. Subsequently, you just to avoid disappointment, there will be continuous remediation. It will never stop. These issues will always arise, even with the best systems and processes in place. However, it's great that there's minimal remediation. Fourth, you have to have grievance mechanisms in place. Grievance mechanisms are great if they are working, but if they are zero, they're not working. So it gives us joy when we see grievance that are sent directly to us anonymously in Burmese language. We translate them, and we know that it's working, especially when it's a trivial grievance. Like, we just got one last week about the worker working under the hot sun. He asked for working under the roof, but he was loading the cargo. So that was a great grievance to us because we realized that it's working. He knows that there's no repercussion because he clearly says that he's in the loading department. So that's not hard because there's only 10 of them. So it's great. So these 4 factors have to be working in order for you to set about the entire change. Yeah, so that would be the answer for me.
Yeah, no, thank you, and very practical again, which is great. So on this kind of dilemma that's been set then, in the case of SMEs, which allow for prioritization according to the impact guidelines, how would you may already have taken this approach, or, hypothetically, if you haven't already, how would you approach that prioritization of which workers or how many workers might receive? Is it based on the amount of debt? Is it based on the risk to them? Is it based on the level of skill? If I can come to you, Keelong, and then we'll go through each of you.
In terms of financially, commercially, with the remediation, it's actually not going great for us because we suddenly incur a large cost and then we have to continuously compete. So to us, it's actually not really important about the guidelines in terms of prioritization. To us, what's important is the actual commercial situation that we have. If we continuously remediate a lot and we do a lot, we become less competitive, we get less business, and we are unable to hire more labor. And that's the reality. So that's the conundrum that we face. So it leads us to invest more into automation. So we look towards skilled labor, we look towards using more machinery. So this is a positive consequence, I would say, of what's happening. So this is, I hope it will expose more about what businesses are facing, rather than, from the other side where, you have to pay and pay and pay. But if you look at it, the decisions we made are very, very difficult.
No, thank you for that. And Carola?
Yeah, so in terms of prioritization, so as we move along and as we do more due diligence, so we do more audit and more of these cases keep on coming up, this is something that we'll be discussing quite a lot internally, and how we make sure that we put our effort to drive the bigger impact on workers. So obviously, like the resources, we have the resources that we have, but we really want to make sure that we try as much as impact as possible, focusing on where workers need it the most. So of course, as best practice, we want that all workers get reimbursed, but as if we have to prioritize, obviously the priority would go to workers that are currently in a situation of debt.
Yeah.
And then it's depending, obviously, how long it would take to repay the debt. But as a best practice will be all workers that pay the recruitment fees, of course.
Thank you, Carola. Matt?
I think it's worth just understanding how tight margins are across the supply chain. And that is getting harder and harder. It's hard to pass inflation on to the retailers in the UK. And we saw a 10% increase on wages last year, for example. So industries are tight, and we have to be responsible to understand those industries and look after them as well. Not, of course, we don't accept any wrongdoing in terms of exploitation, but it's important just to understand that supply chain. So our personal commitment is, if it's something in our control, we absolutely will pay back and look at that. And of course, most of our workers are at the same level in terms of national living wage in the UK, on farms and so forth. So we don't have a big difference between skills and pay. But ultimately, it's mitigating the problem and getting grassroots into those countries, driving better practice to reduce those fees. And yeah, that's a challenge and a job. And as we've talked about, that's where we've got to be focused, collaboration as industries coming together to improve the worker route.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So it's as much about the prioritisation of the risk assessment in the first place and the prevention as it is about, the remediation.
There's just not the money, is there? So.
Well, thank you so much to our panellists for this hopefully really insightful and practical session. The takeaways that I've come away with: the importance of verifying the impact of remediation on workers, the importance of collaboration in terms of the leverage that can have, in terms of sharing some of those financial costs associated, and supporting suppliers with a consistent message, and where relevant, where there are those financial challenges for suppliers. The importance of transparency around the true costs of recruitment in a context of tight margins, and that every party is taking their responsibility for bearing the true costs of recruitment, and that it's not an either-or on voluntary or a legislative approach. Actually, both are needed to drive that continuous improvement. So I hope you'll all join me in thanking our speakers, and then we'll go on to our next session.